The British Columbia Institute of Technology acknowledges that our campuses are located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish nations of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh.
Hello, my name is Lisa Kaftan and it's your news update to 2 p.m. This morning, David Eby was in Surrey to reveal NPD's full election platform. During the conference, he talked about housing and announced plans to subsidize 40% of 25,000 housing units across BC. BC provincial elections are happening on 19th of October. The BC's Nurses Union is telling their members to vote for health care in the upcoming provincial election. Our reporter Isabella Calisi explains what they are looking for from party leaders.
Under the Campaigns and Initiatives page on their website, the BC Nurses Union has outlined what problems they want addressed by potential candidates. This includes implementing minimum nurse-to-patient ratios, reining in spending on private healthcare, and providing safe and healthy workspaces for healthcare workers. They've also listed these key asks in a pamphlet that has been sent out to members around the province, so that healthcare workers can raise issues with election candidates and get a conversation going in their communities. With a union made up of more than 48,000 people, they want to emphasize the importance of the impact members can make on the election. Isabel Calisi, BCIT's The Crow.
An amateur botanist in Delta claims he is the first person in Canada to cultivate the Hyoscyamus insanus. Our reporter Zach Robko explains his love of rare plants has an extra benefit.
Dhruv Gadger has been growing peppers and poisonous plants for over a year. A Pakistani grower he found on Facebook gifted him Hyoscyamus insanus seeds. Gadger's fascination with the rarity of the insanus inspired him to attempt cultivation after growing its sister plant, Hyoscyamus muticus. Additional research showed him the medicinal benefits of the plant. Its high alkaloid content can be used to treat asthma and relieve pain. Gadger hopes to share the seeds with a pharmacologist once he has sustainably cultivated it to utilize its medicinal benefits. Zakharobko, BCIT's The Crow.
Former fashion magnate Peter Nygard has requested bail as he appeals his sexual assault conviction in Toronto and the prison sentence he received last month.
The Ontario Court of Appeal says a motion to grant bail pending the appeal was heard yesterday, but the judge's decision has yet to be released. Nygard's lawyers argued that the trial judge made several errors, including admitting the testimony of a clinical psychologist on the effects of trauma. The court filing last month also argues that Nygard's 11-year sentence is excessive, considering the 83-year-old's severe frailty. Nygard was convicted of 4 counts of sexual assault last year after multiple women came forward with allegations dating from the 1980s until the mid-2000s. Emily Joveski, The Canadian Press, Toronto.
Canada Post is honoring 2 Canadian music television stations with new stamps set to be revealed next week. The postal operator announced today that its latest stamps will feature Much Music and Music Plus for their impact in Canadian music. Canadian Post says the stations connected Canadians with their favorite musicians and established a platform for generations of artists. Much Music launched in 1984, while Music Plus was founded 2 years later. Canada Post will unveil the stamps at a pair of celebrations next Thursday in both Toronto and Montreal, at the buildings that housed Much Music and Music Plus. Here is sound for a commercial ad for Much Music.
Coming this Friday, Much Music, Canada's first all-music network. Much Music, in stereo, 24 hours a day, brings you top music video from Canada and around the world. All music, all the time, on the nation's music station, Much Music. Coming Friday. Rogers subscribers, watch for a special package with more info on Much Music, other specialty channels, and the Rogers Satellite 6, coming in mid-September.
An Indigenous man in Winnipeg has had his name cleared 50 years after being convicted of murdering a restaurant worker. Clarence Woodhouse was acquitted in court today after a review found in conviction was a miscarriage of justice. That's been your news update to 2 p.m. In the weather today, we promise to be it to be partly cloudy. My name is Lisa Kovtun, and you're listening to BCIT The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
Good afternoon. I'm Ethan Van Dopp, and here are your sports updates for 2:10. In baseball, the Milwaukee Brewers kept their season alive last night with a 5-3 win thanks to a home run by Garrett Mitchell in the bottom of the 8th.
He swings and drives one out towards right center. Taylor back, and it's gone! Mitchell, a two-run homer, and the Brewers have the lead. It's 5-3, and this place has come unglued.
Game 3 of that series goes tonight with a trip to the National Series on the line. The winner will face the Philadelphia Phillies. On the mound, Tobias Myers is expected to start for the Brewers. For the Mets, we are expected to see Jose Quintana. Jackson Trio looks to continue his success after he became the first Brewers player with multiple home runs in a postseason game. If the Brewers advance, it will mark the first series win for the team since 2018. For New York, the Mets have a chance to advance past the wildcard series for the first time since 2015. As we move to the pitch, late-game heroics from Harry Maguire gave Manchester United the draw with Porto FC in their Europa League match after a red card to Bruno Fernandes in the 81st minute forced United to play the rest of the game with only 10 players. UEFA has announced the Champions League Team of the Week for match day 2. The Team of the Week includes Aston Villa goalie Emiliano Martinez, Lille right back Thiago Santos, and PSV center back Ryan Flamingo. Martinez became the first goalkeeper since March to post a clean sheet against Bayern Munich with 7 saves. Santos was a defensive powerhouse for Lille against Real Madrid with 6 recoveries and 6 interceptions as Lille upset Real Madrid 1-0. Some news out of the WNBA. Indiana Fever guard Caitlin Clark has been named WNBA Rookie of the Year. Clark received 66 out of 67 possible votes from a panel of sports writers and sportscasters. The one other vote went to Angel Reese of the Chicago Sky. Clark averaged 19.2 points per game, along with 8.4 assists per game. Additionally, the WNBA has announced the all-rookie team, which includes Clark and Reese, along with Rickey Jackson of the Los Angeles Spark, Camila Cardoso of the Chicago Sky, and Leonie Fabici of the New York Liberty. As we look ahead to the NHL regular season, the New York Jersey Devils and the Buffalo Sabres get ready to open the season with the NHL Stadium Series in Prague, Czech Republic. Friday marks the first of 2 games between the teams. The game will mark the regular season coaching debut for Devils head coach Sheldon Keefe. Keefe was hired in May of 2024 and previously coached the Toronto Maple Leafs for 6 seasons. For the Devils, the season offers the opportunity to right the wrongs of last season when they finished 13th in the Eastern Conference. The Buffalo Sabres will look to end their postseason drought of 13 years, which is the longest drought in NHL history. The Sabres have also not won a playoff series in 17 years. The NHL's new Prime Series Face-Off Inside the NHL is set to debut tomorrow. The series will offer viewers a behind-the-scenes look that takes them inside the lives of NHL players, including Oilers captain Connor McDavid, Toronto Maple Leafs forward William Nylander, and Vancouver Canucks captain Quinn Hughes. Oilers forward Zach Hyman says the series will provide a unique insight for fans.
In the moment, fans don't really have access to how does this guy react in between periods, or how does this guy react after a game, or what does the captain say in the locker room after a hard loss or after a win.
The National Hockey League and the Players Association hope to begin discussing a new collective bargain agreement soon. A topic of discussion between the two parties is likely to be the rising cap, which NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman says is set to rise by $4.5 million next season. Bettman also has not shut down the idea of shortening the NHL preseason and extending the NHL regular season, saying the idea was, quote, on the list of things to talk about. The current CBA is set to expire in 2026. NHL hockey has made its return to Quebec City, at least temporarily. The LA Kings will play 2 games in Quebec City as they wrap up their preseason, starting with tonight's game against the Boston Bruins. The Kings and the Florida Panthers will both close out their preseason games in Quebec City on Saturday. Both games will take place at the Videotron Center. The Kings have been billed to play by the Quebec City government. The government sees this as an opportunity for the city to showcase a relatively new arena. I'm Ethan Randolph, and those have been your sports updates to 210.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow. This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm your host, Grace Miller. Today, we're at the Burnaby Village Museum to see the exhibit, Truths Not Often Told, Being South Asian in Burnaby. It's part of the City of Burnaby's Cultural Days. I'm speaking with James Lemke, the museum's curator, to learn more about what the exhibition hopes to share with the Burnaby community.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today. I'm so excited to learn more about the exhibit. Can you tell me a bit about it?
Sure. So it's called Truths Not Often Told, and we coordinated this with our South Asian Advisory Committee, which means that it's different South Asian community members that informed how we might tell a story about being South Asian here in Burnaby, what it means for people that identify within that group, and the different struggles and resilience that community shares. So we intentionally have focused the exhibit on how difficult it has been to find marginalized stories in historical records. So for example, newspapers didn't really report on South Asian community stories unless they were about murder, for example. So we don't get a sense of how that community lived, ate, went to school like we would for the white dominant culture. So the whole exhibit is meant to make visitors think critically about why they might not know more about South Asian history, and then to experience and learn a little bit about what that community has brought to Burnaby and the different stories along the way.
Sharing that kind of information for over a year now that the exhibit has been opened, have you seen an impact on the community?
We have definitely noticed a different visitor groups coming through the museum, so a lot more South Asian Canadians that are enjoying being able to see their stories told at a museum they have otherwise been a little bit more excluded from than they, I'm certain, would have liked to have been. So we've definitely seen a change in who comes to the museum, which is lovely. We're enjoying having more volunteers from the South Asian community, more programs South Asian focus. So we have some South Asian art programs, as well as lots of different performers from the South Asian community, poetry readings, those kinds of things. And we worked with some students at Burnaby School District, different schools around Burnaby, to try and make sure that the youth voice is also told of what it means to be from this community today for people growing up South Asian Canadian. So we're definitely seeing a difference, and I know that having visibility in a museum does have impact on a community because it makes them feel seen, makes them feel part of what makes a community a community.
Part of that would also be included in having the exhibit as part of Cultural Days for the City of Burnaby in its entirety. Can you tell me a bit about how that process went about becoming part of Culture Days for Burnaby?
Sure. So Burnaby's Culture Days is often meant to be exploratory into what it means to be part of Burnaby's community. So different cultural traditions can often come into this event, which is a few weeks long. So traditionally we might put up different workshops, different art programs, but for this year we really wanted to highlight this particular story, this community, to increase visibility into the cultural traditions of being South Asian Canadian. So we have a mosque tour as well, a tour of the Ismaili Center, so all of these different places of worship in Burnaby, as well as this exhibit tour, which was intentional to make sure to include this story, which hasn't really been told from the Burnaby perspective so far. So it's a bit of a different choice to highlight culture as opposed to, say, just racism as experienced by South Asian Canadians.
Speaking of that, in recent years since the pandemic, there's been a starking rise in hate crimes against the South Asian community. A recent report from the RCMP found that Southeast Asians face the second highest crime rates nationally, reaching over 300% rise in crime rates in the first year of the pandemic. How has hate crime played a role in the lives of people living in Burnaby? Have you heard any feedback from that?
Well, it's interesting. We did a lot of work on this when we put the exhibit together, because one story we wanted to tell, and is evident in different areas of the exhibit, is that South Asian experience has been formed by the British Empire and colonization and the movement of people from India around the world, sometimes by choice, sometimes not by choice, and their eventual transition to Canada, and the legacy of anti-colonial activism that's a result of being oppressed. So that story is throughout the exhibit, and it's interesting to think of the fact that those oppressive structures don't end. They're still continuing today, so your statistics are accurate. And I think what we wanted to do was highlight the struggle that is behind these communities, as well as the resilience, the hope, and hopefully be able to teach people through empathy building. So we want to make sure that people understand, from any community, that people understand what it means to be South Asian Canadian, the food, the dress, the traditions, the language that you can hear, the languages that you can hear, which there's lots of them spoken across this community. So that the underpinning of why the community is resilient and activism throughout is there, but also the deep and powerful culture behind these people.
I know that this project was a result of a multi-year research study of the South Asian community in Burnaby. Can you tell me a bit about what the research was like?
So we started with about 2 years worth of research in the libraries and archives in Burnaby, Vancouver, New Westminster, and the federal repositories. And what we found is that we couldn't find as much as we wanted. So when we looked at census records, city directories, which are kind of like the phone book before phones, there was not as many names or markings that made us feel these people were South Asian Canadian, but we knew they existed. So what we were intrigued by was why they weren't in the records and where they were. So we started to look deeper, which means you kind of go backwards through time. So instead of starting with historical records, you start with people that are living in these communities today and ask them the places of meaning they had, what their parents experienced when their parents came, where they worshipped, where they lived. And then we were able to get a better sense of what that community's experience was about 100 years ago. And that took about 2 years before we brought on a co-curator, Dr. Anushay Malik, who's an adjunct professor with SFU. So she came on board to assist, as well as we formed our South Asian Canadian Advisory. So we got the archival records up to a place, and then we got the community involved to try and get a sense of what colors to represent their communities, what stories were the most impactful, what did they really want the general public to understand about them. And it was interesting to do that process because there was a lot of give and take, right? Community has certain opinions, but I know that our visitors are very adventurous and like to beat up our exhibits. So it's a bit of push and pull to make sure that what we're communicating will be understood, digestible, impactful, and really authentic to the communities that are wanting to tell their stories. I see my job as just allowing communities to tell their stories, so I help them, but I'm certainly not telling those stories for them.
What was it like coming to a group that you had put together, like the expert from SFU and the advisory committee here? What was it like coming to them with all this information that you had gathered that wasn't available? It was information that you had pieced together.
I think it was interesting for them to learn and yet not surprising for them, which I thought was quite beautiful. So on the one hand, we thought we had uncovered all these interesting little tidbits, which were really we're able to prove them with historical research, right? Here's a name in a phone book, that person lived here. But the stories behind those people's names, they were not new to these community members. They were sitting there saying, of course, yep, they lived there. I remember that. I remember where we used to celebrate our weddings or where we would have to grocery shop because there were no grocery shops for this community until the 90s in Burnaby. So different stories made a lot of sense to them, but they didn't necessarily have the details and the proof which we came with. So it was a bit of a puzzle or Tetris putting it together.
That was Jane Lemke, curator of the Burnaby Village Museum. The exhibition is currently closed for the season, but is available tonight only for the Cultural Days Curators Tour of the exhibit today between 6 and 8 p.m. This has been For the Record. I'm your host, Grace Miller. Thank you for listening to BCIT's The Crow.
everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikki-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikki-King.